Hello, I'm Julie Lyonn Lieberman. So where did all of this start? String players crossing over between styles rather than playing their regional style. It seems as though it's a fairly recent development in our history, but it isn't. If we look through the past and scan the world, we find the Romany people, the gypsy fiddlers of Eastern Europe, and the klezmer fiddlers of Eastern Europe, both ostracized groups, shared their music with each other, shared gigs with each other. And on the part of the Romany people, as they traveled, because often they weren't allowed to stay in any one place for very long, the work for the musicians came from playing at local social events. And that required a knowledge of regional music, the music of that village, the popular music of that area. In a sense, the Romany fiddlers were the keepers of history throughout Eastern Europe, history of the music, because they collected it as they traveled, and again shared it with klezmer fiddlers and shared gigs. Now, if we jump to America and we zoom back to 1619, when Dutch settlers traded human lives from Africa in exchange for goods, and that began the era of slavery down south, we see that the music that was prevalent at that time, the classic music of Western Europe, fiddling, Celtic fiddling, particularly Irish fiddling coming into that area, and then the inception of hillbilly fiddling, or later called old-time fiddling. These are the styles that slaves were coming into, and a slave that showed an aptitude for music would often be trained to play the fiddle, not because of the kindness of the plantation owner's heart, but because it actually upped their value. They could be rented out to play at state balls. For instance, Cy Gilliat from Virginia, he played all of the Virginia state balls. He was the fiddler that everyone wanted. He played incredibly, he knew the repertoire, and in exchange, he didn't have to work hard labor in the fields. He had his own cabin. He enjoyed some luxuries, full wardrobe, matching shoes. However, he was never a free man. This ability to play at social functions was a trade-off. Picnics, weddings, dances, parties, whatever it was up to the plantation owner to train the player, to train the slave fiddler. And what happened in the private lives of the slave community is that as certain vocal styles from West Africa melded with certain traditions from the musics that had come over with immigrants, we had the evolution of the art form we now call the blues. And so the two instruments, this is very important for you string players, the two instruments that created the blues, and of course the blues fanned out in a number of directions, into jazz playing, into bluegrass. Bill Monroe loved the blues and incorporated aspects of that into his hillbilly style of vocals, Appalachian style of singing. And so again, we have these two threads, and then we have R&B, rhythm and blues, later to be called rock and roll, and zillions of different offshoots from that style of music. So this rich, fertile style, the blues, in combination with old-time fiddling and the classic music of Western Europe, those are the skills that these bowed string players had. Now coming forward in history to the 1860s, as slavery was abolished, we had a whole community of African American fiddlers and classical players who now form string bands and got their work still playing at social functions in the area that they lived in. We also had a whole group of them that migrated to the cities. And when you look at the history, the early history for jazz violin, we see that they dropped out of sight for a little while. They were improvising musicians. They were a part of the inception of jazz. But the music, as it came into bars, noisy environments, they didn't yet have amplification and could not be heard. Even coming into Stuff Smith's early career, his big break was to be hired by the Jelly Roll Morton's band, and when he got his train ticket and he went to meet them and couldn't be heard over the horns. So we pick up this thread again, and of course I did all of this research in the late 1970s when I worked on my book Blues Fiddle, and that book is now called Rockin' Out with Blues Fiddle. It took me another 10 years after that book came out to figure out what happened to these players. And actually, it's pretty interesting. Some of them ended up playing in the red light district. How do we know this? From police reports, raids on houses of prostitution, and arrests made, and listing the goods that came along with the people that were arrested. We also see that a whole group of players ended up working in the movie theaters playing for the silent films.